Chapter 3. Mucus Mayhem. "Watch out!" called a man in terror. "Take cover!" boomed another before diving for shelter. People appeared to be recoiling from a short, thin, gaunt-looking man with a large red hooked nose, who stood with his head flung back, mouth open wide, taking in all the air it could, whilst seemingly infinite amounts of oxygen were being sucked into the man's gaping mouth. People everywhere were diving over walls made of polished black stone bricks the size of filing cabinets. Throngs more were tearing through a giant red Japanese pagoda gateway, whilst, to the left of the pagoda, others were battling to bring down the portcullis of an ancient castle entrance. In the midst of this pandemonium, a sultry black woman dressed in black, with buckles running up the sides of her legs and lace floating down from her arms, sauntered casually out from a dark alleyway to the right of the pagoda. Apparently unconcerned by the commotion around her, she walked purposely towards the man everyone else was trying to get away from. Just as she came up on his right side, he flung his head forwards violently and produced a most horrendous sneeze. As if shot out of a blunderbuss, bright blue-white globules of mucus flew from his nose and mouth to tear across the pristine marble courtyard. The force of his sneeze was so great, it was as if the man had been hit in the stomach by a cannonball. The long sleeves of his wispy cloak and floppy trouser legs flew forwards as the sneeze shot him backwards. If it wasn't for the globules from his nose floating in the air, it would have looked almost artful. Unmoved, the woman calmly stretched out her arm to catch the man in mid-air by the scruff of his neck. Holding him at arm's length, she regarded him. Her locks of deep red, slightly wavy hair drew away from her face as if by her command. Her stern stare was betrayed by her warm burgundy eyes. In a voice as sultry as her appearance, she asked, "Do you have to breathe in so much?" The man grinned sheepishly at the woman as he sat dangled in mid-air. His eyes trailing to the floor below him, he adjusted his small black spectacles and said timidly, "I'll try to remember that, right after you put me down." The woman sighed. "No, you remember that now, and after I put you down." She looked pointedly over to her right. "You'll go and clean up that mess." By now, many of the globules of mucus had coagulated into large, undulating blobs floating in the marble courtyard and emitting a bright light. Upon closer inspection, it seemed as though white clouds were passing inside them against a sky-blue background. Some of the mighty black walls were also covered in these globules of mucus. These too appeared to show a summer's day sky in real time as they oozed slowly downwards. People began to reappear from behind walls, dusting themselves off as they took in the slime-strewn scene. The portcullis of the castle opened to cries of "Yuck!" from the emerging crowds as they tried to avoid the floating mucus, whilst not stepping on any of the sky-blue and cloud-white globules littering the courtyard floor. Amongst all the commotion, the ominous hum of Requiem's monolith was barely noticeable. It suddenly appeared in all its brilliance opposite the pagoda gate. Requiem and Gio emerged and proceeded to stroll towards the crowd, apparently oblivious to the slime trail of destruction around them. The instant she saw the monolith, the woman dropped the snotty man in a heap on the floor and stepped back as if to disassociate herself from him, albeit unconvincingly. It wasn't only the woman, it seemed. The appearance of Requiem and Gio had made everyone uneasy. People stole fleeting glances at the pair before quickly diverting their eyes, pretending to be highly interested in the floating globules. Oblivious, Requiem and Gio arrived between the man and the woman and stopped. Requiem looked down as the sheepish man grinned up at him. "Couldn't you have given Uracil a hanky, Freya?" said Gio sarcastically as he looked at the slime trail of destruction in dismay. "Better still, couldn't you have held his nose? Requiem inquired menacingly, choosing not to look at the damage, but to stare straight down at Uracil instead. His disapproving glare cut into Uracil like two ice-cold daggers, giving him goosebumps. Giving Requiem an equally deathly glare, Freya snapped defensively. "You know what that would do to him?" As soon as the words were out of her mouth, she realised her mistake and pulled back, removing her glare from Requiem. She looked submissively to the floor. To raise your voice in anger at Requiem is to poke a stick at a sleeping tiger. After staring at Freya for a long moment, Requiem turned to look down at Uracil once more. This mucus mayhem had shattered the decorum that Requiem held in such high regard. "Yes, I do know," he replied darkly. Shrinking back in fear as Requiem moved towards him, Uracil clenched every measly muscle he had in preparation for the worst. When his body could no longer hold the tension, he opened his eyes to see that Requiem had passed him by, and was walking with Gio up to the same dark alleyway that Freya had emerged from moments earlier. As Requiem and Gio passed the Red Pagoda gateway, they heard a loud and unnerving crack. This was swiftly followed by the sound of alarmed screams and the scuffle of many pairs of feet racing away. They both stopped with their backs to the commotion as they calmly waited for the inevitable plume of dust and blue-white globules as the giant red pagoda came crashing down. Gio sighed and shook his head in his hands. "It's like living next to Mount Vesuvius with Uracil around." Gio pulled his hands down his face, stretching it in despair before adding brightly, "Well, at least it adds an edge of excitement to the day. I mean, you never know when you're going to have a portal to a random place splattered all over you." Requiem gave Gio an indignant glance. Although, in truth, he liked and respected Uracil as much as Gio and Freya did, the man's haphazard nature grated on Requiem's sensibilities. If it wasn't for Uracil's frequent moments of brilliance, it was likely that Requiem would have imploded him long ago. Requiem checked his pocket watch. "I'm off to recreate the concert without Rocky and the bobbing geriatrics so I can relax a little. Turning the world inside out was enough exertion for one morning. And now, seeing Uracil destroy the Red Pagoda is more than I can bear. I need to unwind before I really do hold his nose and make him open a portal in his head. Maybe he'd find his brains then." Requiem continued up the alleyway, leaving Gio to deal with the devastation. The mighty black walls that made the boundaries of the marble courtyard also formed 4 alleyways constructed from the same unspeakably large bricks. So impenetrable and so close, the walls of these alleyways cast a dark and unforgiving shadow on the grey granite floor. The key property of the black material from which these bricks were made was that it was highly energy absorbent. Heat, light, impact, they all made contact with the black material and were never to be seen again, their effects never felt. This property made the mighty walls of the marble courtyard nigh on indestructible. However, the closeness of this black material in the alleyways sapped the space between of heat, making them perpetually cold. A thick mist sat forever heavy on the ground. This cold mist, combined with the smooth, apparently featureless towering walls, and a darkness that could swallow an outstretched hand, meant that these alleyways were not for the faint-hearted. There was no telling where or when the darkness would relinquish its secrets and show travellers where their many-laboured footsteps had taken them. After a while, and for no obvious reason, Requiem stopped. Focusing on the wall in front of him, he produced a watch from his waistcoat pocket and pressed the button on its top. Through the glass, the cogs could clearly be seen spinning frantically, becoming blurs of silver and gold before emerging together to form the shape of a dragon. The tiny dragon flew out of the watch at Requiem, growing larger as it did so, and coiled its long gold and silver body around him. This was Requiem's storm dragon. As it circled Requiem with increasing speed, A small but potent tornado howled into life. Requiem stood safely in its eye as it sucked the mighty bricks of the black wall towards him. Suddenly, the cogs of the watch stopped, prompting the storm dragon to dive back in. As the cogs returned to normal pace, the tornado dissipated to reveal a dark, wood-panelled drawing room. The only light in the sparsely decorated room came from a roaring fire, next to which sat an inviting armchair and a round wooden table carrying a steaming cup of tea. As Requiem walked towards the chair, music started to flow gently into the room, making the fire flicker momentarily. As he sat down and sipped his own personal blend of tea, a soothing chorus of voices backed by a melodic orchestra eased his tension. Requiem sank further into his chair and sighed with relief. No one was going to ruin this moment.